Just before we get started, we'll do a little bit of housekeeping. So my name's Eva. I'm from the partnerships team in Ark Curriculum Plus. Previously was a science teacher, so science mastery is my favourite, although don't tell the other subjects that. And I've got my colleague Jess delivering the webinar today, so I'll let her kind of do her own intro.
Thanks, Eva. Thanks for joining me today, everyone. Good afternoon. As Eva said, my name is Jess Wood. I'm Head of Subject for Secondary Science at Ark Curriculum Plus. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today. We're going to explore how we can make science more equitable without lowering expectations for our students. I hope today will be really practical, high-impact strategies that are rooted in real classroom experience that you can take away with you. So let's get started. So this is just the agenda for today. We've got a quick introduction about who we are, as well as setting the context for why we're talking about equity. And then we've got some strategies, which I hope you'll find really helpful. Curriculum model for equity, looking at formative assessment, and developing teacher efficacy. And I have a little side note for you on timetabling. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background about why we feel able to share our approach on this problem. Ark Curriculum Plus is part of Ark Schools, which is multi-academy trust. We serve schools across England, which are from a really diverse range of schools, actually. 90% of our schools are in areas of above average deprivation. And as a result, 45% of Ark students are eligible for free school meals, which is nearly double the national average of 25%. Many art schools serve communities with a high proportion of students with SEND also. So I'm sure you can see that equity is a really important issue and becomes a really key focus for art schools. The good news is that we have really moved the needle on this. So now ARC students who are eligible for the pupil premium actually make nearly half a grade more progress in each subject than their peers nationally. 83% of ARC sixth form students progress to university compared to 37% nationally. And actually for the pupil premium students or those eligible for free school meals, that's an even bigger difference between what is being achieved in ARC schools compared to the gap with other schools. We're also really proud that schools, when they join the network, often are not good or outstanding, but now every single one of our schools is good or outstanding or a sort of similar judgment under the new framework. At Ark Curriculum Plus, we have a really clear mission. It's to empower teachers to give every young person, regardless of their background, the subject knowledge and skills that will allow them to succeed. And that actually doesn't just refer to students in schools doing our program, it's all students. So that's why we wanted to share what we've learned today to hopefully give some of our learning to other schools in order that they can also close these gaps. I work for Ark Curriculum Plus, so we don't just support schools within the Ark network, we actually have schools all over the UK, or all over England, and a few other select places. You can see all the pins here of the different places where Ark Curriculum Plus is in schools, and this is just Science Mastery. The pins for all the programs cover the whole UK nearly. So why are we talking about equity? Well, particularly in science, we think the gaps in achievement for various different disadvantaged groups are vast and widening. I'm just going to give you 2 minutes to read through some of the statistics here. So as you can see, some really stark gaps are widening between students with SEND, students who are eligible for pupil premium or on free school meals. And also we know that there are gaps from students from different ethnic backgrounds where they are not supported by the current science curriculum. I want to make it really clear that we don't believe that these gaps are to do with the students. The gaps are systemic barriers to achievement in science. And just 3 of those that have been identified by various different organisations, including the ASC, the IOE, the Royal Society, include limited curriculum time, pressure to cover content quickly, and the lack of inclusive curriculum materials. So I'll just speak to a few of those in a bit more detail. Firstly, the lack of curriculum time is something we see quite often in our schools. Despite the fact that science is worth 2 or 3 GCSEs and is a core subject, it's not actually reflected in the amount of time given to science lessons. And there's a national trend, as you can see in the graph, that less and less time is being given to science and less than English or maths. At Ark schools, science is part of a core offer for pupils, and as a result, departments tend to have 5 or even 6 lessons a week at Key Stage 4, which we think is really helping. One area we are looking at across the network is access to triple science, however, because it's common practice across many schools to offer triple science to a select group of high priority students without giving them any extracurricular time. This limits access to the extra knowledge and that qualification to only those students who are able to sort of skim through the content at that 1.5 times as fast speed as the rest of the cohort. So as a result, many students aren't offered the pathway, then feel that then science is not for them, it's something they can't do, which is a real problem when we think about XT. So this is why students from more challenging backgrounds or those with special needs are underrepresented at all levels of education in science beyond GCSE. Linked to this, we often find schools talking about the pressure to cover the content quickly at the expense of depth of understanding, and that includes high quality practicals. There's just so much content in science curriculum, so teachers can sometimes struggle to deliver all of that. There was a recent study last year by the Science Teaching Survey, and that found that 72% of science teachers believe that the curriculum was overloaded, and therefore they're going to just focus on substantive knowledge, covering it as quickly as possible without really considering the depth that's needed and the disciplinary knowledge that underpins the subject. What we see is that this means students struggle to remember from year to year what they have learned but previously, and can really struggle. So then certain groups can really struggle to keep up. Finally, we think that there is a lack of inclusive curriculum materials, so that students often don't feel that they are part of the science curriculum, and they can therefore become disengaged with it. It means it's hard for them to see themselves reflected in the science curriculum because the interests don't match their interests, or perhaps they don't see themselves in those resources. So simply put, students don't think that science is relevant for them. So I'm just going to give you a couple of moments here to consider to what extent are those issues relevant for your context. You're more than welcome to share information in the chat if you have something to add, but if you'd rather just reflect by yourself, that's absolutely fine. Okay, great. So when we're thinking about the strategies, the overarching point of today is that every decision maker needs to have an equity lens when they're supporting their choices. When we can make decisions inadvertently, trying to improve progress, trying to deliver a curriculum that we think is right, but if we don't have that equity lens, we can actually make problems a lot worse. We can open those gaps. So it's really important that every decision maker has an equity lens when they're making those choices for students. The way that Ark schools have done this is by thinking about 3 main ideas that we're going to talk about today. So strengthening the implementation through an improved curriculum model, using formative assessment to identify and close knowledge gaps, and supporting teachers in developing deep, secure understanding of core concepts. So when we talk about curriculum design, we know that using the best research to implement a curriculum is going to support students to make the best progress, and that this will be particularly relevant for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. So one idea I want to really talk about is the Big Ideas framework for curriculum planning. So this was an idea introduced by Win Harlan, and he had he was key figure in shaping this approach of teaching students a smaller number of powerful interconnected concepts rather than a broad array of disconnected facts. So what we find students often think of in science is they just have fact after fact after fact, lesson after lesson after lesson. But what we can do is have a golden thread all through our curriculum so that students can link ideas together. One example of this would be organisms are interdependent. By being able to use that thread through lots of different topics, students understand that they're building on previous ideas and build their own confidence. We also weave our disciplinary skills into the curriculum so that every part of the curriculum has a clear goal in terms of disciplinary skills. So we're making the implicit explicit. Therefore, we don't just assume that students know how to make a scale, for example, on a graph. We actively teach them how to do it so that no student is left behind. One real focus in Ark schools is inclusivity of resources. So we do that in two ways. One, science in the news. We show students that science is relevant and up to date for them, as well as including scientists in focus resources where students can see scientists who look like them so that they understand that science is relevant for them. And finally, we ensure that resources are really language rich. We know that in our schools, lots of students come with lower than average vocabulary levels, lower than average reading levels, and so it's really important that we foreground any keywords that are going to underpin those topics. So I'm just going to give you another minute to consider how your curriculum design is built to enhance equity. And I've included in the orange box some takeaways that you might like to think about for how you can develop this in your own context. So that's using the Big Ideas framework to map out your long-term plan, ensuring maths and practical skills are not an add-on, they support the learning, and seeking opportunities to demonstrate to pupils that science is for them. So I'll give you a minute just to have a little think about that. And like I said before, if you want to add a thought into the notes, into the chat, you're more than welcome. Okay, so linked to this idea of our curriculum model is that although we have a sequence of learning, we have really tightly mapped out topic sequences, we really must understand how they all link together in order to support student success. For pupils with LPA, SEND, or from disadvantaged backgrounds, we often find they're missing key bits of knowledge, which is going to prevent them from grasping trickier topics. For example, you might have experienced the frustration of teaching electrolysis. I've seen teachers deliver this to classes who have just simply no idea what the teacher is talking about, and it's really painful. When you dig down, you realize there's just so much underpinning this key idea of electrolysis, and if students don't have it, you're going to really struggle. So let me flesh this out a little bit. So to understand electrolysis, you need to know about atomic structure, particle model of matter, you need to understand forces, specifically electrostatic forces, which you obviously can't understand until you've understood forces. Atomic structure builds to the formation of ions. Particle model of matter builds the properties of matter. We need to know about the properties of ionic compounds. And that is all not to say we need to know about circuits, charge, and current. So all of these key ideas underpin the student success in learning about electrolysis. And I haven't even included all the ideas about reactivity that you could add. So the ARK approach to curriculum is to ensure that students obtain the prerequisite knowledge at every stage before moving on, and that's called a mastery approach. If they don't have that knowledge, it's key that teachers revisit previous topics rather than just ploughing on through the topic. This is linked to what I said about teachers finding that there's too much in the curriculum, struggling to get through the content, is that actually we have this pressure to get through the content, whereas what we should do is really focus on the skills that students have and building on them. We find this is why the big ideas approach helps. It shows teachers the links from topic to topic, year to year, so they can make the right decisions for their classes. And that prevents students from falling through the gaps if they don't have a particular piece of core knowledge. And I'm sure you've already made the link to formative assessment. So here is the range of assessment types that art schools use, and I'm sure that nothing here is very surprising to you. So for one example, we use exit tickets. I'm sure lots of you are familiar with the idea of exit tickets that show teachers what students have done. And if they haven't got a particular concept at the end of one lesson, then there's a fix-it task at the beginning of the next lesson. But Ark goes a lot further than just this kind of formative assessment. We include pre-unit quizzes, for instance. They're short multiple choice questions that pupils complete prior to the unit, and they're designed to check that pupils have that prerequisite knowledge before starting the unit. Going back to the electrolysis example, the pre-unit quiz for that unit would check that students have that solid grasp of ionic bonding, current, before attempting to teach the unit. And if necessary, teachers are encouraged to revisit the ideas before teaching rather than ploughing on through. And this is important for equity because it means that students build success rather than learning that they are failing. And by constantly assessing where pupils are, lessons can be pitched to build on that prior knowledge. So therefore, a teacher wouldn't have to deliver an electrolysis lesson that's so dumbed down that it loses all its purpose. Instead, students will come to that lesson with a strong grasp of the underlying concepts and therefore be set up for success. As a network, we actually go even further. We analyze data at the whole network level, and we ensure that where gaps have opened up, we support teachers to close them through our QLA process. We give suggestions about what teachers might like to do next, but we also make sure that we iterate our expert design resources to close those gaps before they arise for any cohorts as they come through. So our resources are constantly improving year on year so that our next cohort of students benefits from what we've learned from our current cohort. So I'm going to give you a minute here to think about how you can use assessment to ensure no student is left behind and that gaps are closed year on year. And some takeaways for you are that you might like to highlight opportunities for assessing students' prerequisite knowledge in advance of a learning sequence, build checkpoints into the curriculum and don't move on unless students are ready, and include high-level data analysis opportunities and build that into your curriculum. So I'll just give you a minute to think about that. Okay, fab. So now I'm going to talk about teacher efficacy. This is where we're supporting teachers to develop deep, secure understanding of core concepts so that they can close these gaps that we've been talking about. Art schools generally are characterised by a large number of trainee and early career teachers, as well as sometimes those teaching outside of specialism. So a key part of the Ark offer is to have subject-specific CPD included within the teaching timetable. We call these sessions co-planning, and when I was a head of department, they were the highlight of my week. As I'm sure you know, teachers often a keen, nerdy bunch, and so co-planning is a brilliant opportunity to support each other in moving our teaching forward. Obviously, this does not come cheap. It's one of the biggest investments that Ark schools make in their teachers. We find that head teachers really do recognise the importance of building teacher efficacy as that lever to close gaps for underperforming students. And for this reason, some of them even use pupil premium funding to allocate to the investment in staff's time. A really interesting development has been the shift from a whole school pedagogy focus to that subject-specific intellectual preparation. In the improvement journey of schools, it can be really easy for senior leaders to focus on building consistency through implementing a series of pedagogical strategies. In art schools, this happened previously, and it looked like whole school CPD, led by a member of SLT, perhaps followed by a checklist used in observations to ensure the implementation of those strategies. And that definitely led to improved consistency across classrooms. But what we're recognizing now more and more in the Ark schools is that more nuance is required to really build that equity in the delivery of the curriculum. So now there's a shift to that subject-specific intellectual preparation, where middle leaders are empowered to build their teams using curriculum as the vehicle for departmental improvement. And one way we've done this is by developing subject primers, which are really detailed documents designed to develop the senior leadership team's understanding of what excellent looks like in science. And that's going to support them to look for real markers of student success rather than the poor proxies of learning that they might previously have been looking for. Other tools that we have used to improve teacher efficacy are including the co-planning time within the timetable, as I've said, investing in high quality curriculum resources designed by subject experts in order to build teacher subject expertise, because we do recognise that many of our teachers come to the classroom without a deep subject knowledge. So where teachers have gaps in their knowledge, they might not be able to identify the core knowledge that pupils need. Their explanations might be less than clear, and that's only going to exacerbate any gaps that already exist. So by precisely outlining the knowledge required and giving teachers the information they need, we can support this. So just to give you some examples, in our PowerPoints within Ark schools, there are the knowledge that students need is really clearly laid out, and there's a model teacher exposition provided. And what this does is it means that all teachers can develop their teaching expertise through delivery of these lessons, and we find that their confidence in the subject knowledge builds really quickly. We also provide supporting resources such as unit preparation guides, which highlight common mistakes that students make and the reasons why it's a mistake. And that really helps teachers to preempt these gaps that might be existing and support their students to close them. Great. So I'm just going to give you a little scenario now to have a think about, as I said before, with an equity lens. So teacher A wants her pupils to learn about the colours of light. She sets a practical task where students look at different objects through coloured filters and ask them to use that to decide how filters work. So I'd like you to think about what are the benefits of that approach and also what are the problems. And I'll give you maybe 30 seconds to think about it. Feel free to add your ideas in the chat, or if you just want to write them down independently, that's fine. Okay, so thinking about the benefits and the potential problems. So the way I see it, the benefits are that actually discovery learning is seen as fun for students and it might engage them. And for students who can work out the answer and use the practical to find out how filters work, they're going to build confidence. However, when we think about it with an equity lens, we know that some students will struggle and be unsuccessful because they lack the prerequisite knowledge to do this successfully. And it will be those students who struggle, those students who struggle are likely to be those students who are already disadvantaged. So what we're doing by this kind of a scenario is actually widening the gap. Instead, what we suggest is that the teacher really explicitly teaches the students about how filters work and then sets up a nice scaffolded supporting practical that further embeds their knowledge and understanding of how filters work, rather than using the discovery learning tool, which we know can just leave some students completely behind where all the others are. Okay, so another moment for reflection here. To what extent do your resources and training build subject knowledge in teachers? And the takeaways for you to consider are, how you can upskill and empower your middle leadership team to build their own team. So if you're a senior leader, that might be relevant for you. How you can protect as much time in departments as possible for shared planning, and how you can ensure that shared curriculum resources are designed to support teachers to precisely deliver that core knowledge that we spoke about to close those gaps for students. I'll give you about 30 seconds to think about that. Okay, great. So finally, we need to talk about timetabling. Many of the inequities I see in schools are baked into the timetable. So here's just some examples of issues that I see that lead to gaps between the students that we've discussed. Teachers teaching in their specialism leads to them only seeing pupils twice a week. So they don't really build a rapport and understanding of what students can do. This might work really well if you had a high prioritizing class who were able to kind of not need that rapport with their teacher. But students with disadvantage might actually really benefit from having that consistency of teacher who knows them really well. Often I see that triple science is only for a top set because not enough curriculum time is given over to it. And that is just going to lead to many students who are disadvantaged not being able to do triple science, which I think is really problematic. I often see in the timetable that bottom sets aren't prioritized, with teachers just looking at who is on the 4-5 borderline of the 3-4, and they don't think about what sets need the most support. And as I alluded to before, curriculum time is taken away from science. I have seen some things happen where the teachers have the best of intentions, but they haven't considered about what the equity compromise is going to be. So an example I came across recently was a school where they needed to reduce the amount of hours in science, but they were aware that that might be challenging for some students. So they decided to keep triple having additional curriculum time. They gave the students doing higher tier additional curriculum time. With the students doing foundation, they said, well, they don't have as much content, so they can just have a little bit less curriculum time. But for me, I was really concerned that less time for foundation tier students would almost certainly disproportionately affect students who fall into these groups we've already talked about. And so they would have lower progress for that group, and therefore the gap between them would increase. So a really quick takeaway here for you in the orange box is just to review curriculum decisions that are taken during timetabling through an equity lens, and make sure that all these decisions that are taken for absolutely the best reasons aren't going to exacerbate issues between disadvantaged groups and their peers. So it's really important when you're considering which of these strategies you might want to implement, that you think about how to implement that change carefully. So I've just put this slide here to suggest that we shouldn't jump into delivering it all in one go. We should really carefully choose the priority, research the fit for you and your context, prepare really carefully by planning what you're going to do, training your team so they understand what you're after, setting everything up. Obviously, there's the delivery piece where you're going to start the new piece of work, implement the changes, then also using data to sustain what you're doing, using celebrating what's going well, but also iterating and making any changes needed. So just to summarize then, this is a very brief overview of Ark's approach to science teaching. We should have evidence-informed strategies that have worked really well across our schools, having that curriculum coherence, We scaffold without diluting. We have language-rich teaching. We embed formative assessment. We support deep understanding of core concepts. We use formative assessment to close knowledge gaps. And we strengthen the implementation of the curriculum through our teacher subject knowledge by giving them that planning time. And as a result, we can start to remove barriers to equity in science. I want to make it really clear, equity is definitely not about lowering the bar here. In fact, I would argue that all of these suggestions are about raising the bar to make it equal for all students. I strongly believe that practical, thoughtful curriculum drives design can really drive change. And this is, I think, a key part to the success that Ark schools have had in doing so. And it's fundamental that every student deserves access to that powerful science knowledge. So I'm going to leave it there. If you have any questions at all, please do pop them in the chat. Or if you have any comments, anything you'd like to add, maybe you've experienced a similar barrier and found a way of overcoming it that I haven't mentioned, love to hear that. If not, I'm going to pass over to Eva.
Fab. Thank you very much, Jess. Yeah, that was really interesting. I think it's always important to kind of have that as a consideration at the heart of all curriculum decisions. As Jess said, like if you would like to reach out at all to talk about science mastery, then please do either email the email address on the screen there, or you can also kind of book directly there just to chat with me or a member of the team, and where we can discuss in a little bit more detail what that might look like in your specific school context.